The match caught faster than I expected. A small, trembling light bloomed in the half-dark kitchen, turning the air gold for a heartbeat. I held it close to the edge of the envelope, my hand steady but my breath uneven. The paper gave in with a faint sigh, like it had been waiting for this. The gold lettering her name, her new beginning turned black at the edges, curling inward as if embarrassed to be seen. I watched the flame feed on it, slow and deliberate, until all that was left was smoke and a smell I couldn't name, something between old perfume and forgotten sweetness. If quiet stories stay with you, you might want to subscribe. There are more like this, whispered between the pauses. The light outside was pale and thin, the kind that makes you think of hospitals and empty rooms. I hadn't opened the curtains yet. The city beyond them moved like a tired thought soft, slow, unwilling. My apartment felt smaller than usual. The walls had learned to listen too well. On the table, a chipped cup, 2 lemons that had gone dry, and now, a pile of gray ash that still carried the shape of what it used to be. I hadn't slept. The invitation had arrived the night before, slid quietly under the door. I'd recognized her handwriting before I even turned it over. The way she curved her letter stew, elegant for the things she never said. It had made my stomach twist, the way it used to when I was a child, and she'd call my name in that tired voice, the one that meant, "Come here," but never stay. The kettle began to hiss, but I turned off the stove before it could whistle. I didn't want noise. Not today. The envelope had been heavy when I first picked it up, as if it carried something more than paper, something like an ending. I'd turned it over and over in my hands, tracing the faint gold seal, trying to imagine her smile as she wrote my name. Maybe she believed it was enough to send an invitation and call it forgiveness. The matchbox was right there, small and harmless. I remember thinking how easy it would be, how one spark could take away the weight of years I didn't know how to name. So I struck the match and watched it flare alive, thin as a whisper. The flame spread along the edge of the envelope, slow at first, then faster, confident. I could hear the faint crackle like old memories being remembered against their will. I leaned closer, hypnotized by how something so delicate could destroy so cleanly. The gold turned to smoke. The name disappeared. I told myself it was a kind of freedom, that I was letting go. The smoke drifted upward, drawing a gray veil between me and the window. The sunlight tried to push through but gave up halfway. I imagined her standing somewhere far away, by the sea maybe, holding another match, burning something of her own. A photograph, a letter, a bridge. When I set the half-burnt paper on the saucer, the fire found its rhythm. It ate in circles like it knew what it was doing. The air thickened, carrying the smell of scorched ink and wax. I tried to breathe normally. My chest resisted. I thought about her voice again, how it always sounded steady, even when it cracked. She was good at hiding the shake in her words. I learned that from her. I reached for the window latch but stopped halfway. Through the smoke, I saw my reflection in the glass. My face blurred, edges softened, eyes hollow. For a moment it looked like hers. The resemblance startled me, the same tilt of the mouth, the same guarded sadness. I looked away. The invitation was almost gone now, a small sun collapsing into itself. I pressed the last burning corner down with a spoon until it went out, leaving a trail of gray that spread like veins. My fingers trembled, not from heat, but from something else, something older. I sat there for a long time, staring at what was left. The table held it like a secret, ash scattered over the blue ring of the saucer. I rubbed one bit between my fingers. It felt like dust, light and final. But I knew better. Nothing ever really ended. It just changed shape, waited for you to notice. I thought of the last time we spoke, the sound of her closing the door, the words that stuck in my throat after she was gone. How I had stood by the window that night, waiting for her to turn back just once. But she didn't. Maybe that's why I couldn't open the envelope. Because it wasn't about her wedding. It was about that moment, the one where she kept walking, and I pretended I didn't care. Outside, a siren passed, distant and soft. The sound barely reached me. I poured myself tea, though it had gone cold already. The lemon didn't float. It sank slowly until it disappeared beneath the surface. I watched it and thought about how easy it is for something to vanish without noise. The smell of smoke clung to my hair, my sleeves, the curtain fabric. It felt wrong to open a window now. The air in the room had become part of me. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and saw her face again, not as she is now, but as she was when I was small. The light in her hair, the way her hands smelled of soap and rain, the sound of her saying my name before the silence between us grew teeth, the ash cooled. The room settled. I told myself it was done, that I'd burned it to forget. But the quiet that followed wasn't peace, it was space. A kind of waiting. The kind that makes you aware of every sound. The soft hum of the fridge, the faint tick of the clock, the hollow rhythm of your own pulse. I thought about writing back. Maybe just one line, I got it. But even that felt like too much truth for a single sentence. So I did nothing. I just watched the smoke dissolve, leaving faint trails on the glass that looked almost like handwriting. Somewhere out there, she was preparing for a new life. Somewhere the sea was touching the hem of her dress. Somewhere she still didn't know I had never stopped listening. By afternoon, the light shifted. Warm, tired, forgiving. I cleaned the table, but the mark from the saucer stayed a faint burn circle, permanent and almost perfect. It reminded me of her, of us, of everything that once held fire, and now pretended it didn't. When night came, the room finally let go of the smoke. The air turned cold again. I stood by the window, and for the first time that day, I saw my reflection clearly. No fire, no haze, just me behind me, the quiet table where the ashes still waited, patient and gray. That's when I realized the burning didn't end anything. It only began the part where the light had to live without heat. It arrived on a Tuesday, the kind of day that doesn't ask for attention. The light was soft and distant, the sea outside calm enough to sound like breathing. When the mail slid through the slot, I didn't move right away. I heard it fall, a small sound. One more thing among the quiet. A brown envelope. No handwriting I recognized, no return address. Just my name, Mara, written in thin, deliberate letters. The ink looked like it had been pressed too hard, as if whoever wrote it wanted the word to stay. I turned it over a few times before setting it on the counter. Something about the weight of it felt wrong. Too light to matter, too heavy to ignore. The kettle was humming behind me, water just before boil. I turned off the stove before it could whistle. For a moment, the silence after felt alive. I sat at the table, tracing the envelope's edges with my thumb, pretending I wasn't afraid to open it. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air. It had been a week since I'd burned the invitation, and yet it followed me soft, invisible, but always there. It hid in the curtains, in my clothes, in the spaces between thoughts. It reminded me of her, of Lila, and how everything between us now lived in what wasn't said. When I finally tore the flap open, it gave way too easily. Inside was a single photograph. No note, no explanation. Just an image, glossy and cold. A field wide, gray, endless. The kind that looks like it remembers everything that's ever passed through it. The sky above it was heavy with cloud, almost metallic. In the center stood a chair, wooden, old, tilted slightly, as if it had been sitting there longer than it should have. And far in the distance, blurred almost to invisibility, a shadow, a person maybe, or a memory caught on film. I turned the photograph over. 4 words, written in the same ink that had addressed the envelope. You never looked back. My fingers tightened without meaning to. The room felt smaller. I read the words again, quietly this time, as if saying them softer might change what they meant. The handwriting, I knew it instantly. The small, deliberate slope of the letters. It was hers. My daughter's. The air shifted. The house creaked the way old things do when they're asked to remember. I set the photograph on the table, watching the reflection of light move across its surface. A gust of wind from the ocean pushed against the window pane, low and steady, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I wanted to call her. I wanted to hear her voice, even if it was sharp, even if it hurt. But the phone sat too far away and I didn't know what I'd say. Why now? Why this? I picked up the photograph again and studied it. The field wasn't familiar, at least not at first, but there was something about the way the grass bent, all in one direction, as if it had learned obedience from the wind. It reminded me of somewhere we'd been years ago. A day when she was small, holding my hand, her hair bright against the gray sky. I tried to remember where. The edges of the memory stayed just out of reach, like the figure in the distance. I set the photo down and walked to the sink, turning on the water just to hear something alive. The faucet rattled, spitting air before the stream steadied. I watched it run and thought about the last time we'd spoken 3 years ago, maybe 4. The conversation had ended like a door closing too softly to notice at first. We both said things that sounded final, but neither of us knew it yet. The photograph lay there watching me. I couldn't stop glancing back at it, as if the image might change when I wasn't looking. There was a shadow in that field, thin, uncertain. I imagined it as her, standing alone somewhere far away, waiting for me to turn around. You never looked back. It was an accusation. It was truth, written like confession. I hadn't looked back. Not when she left. Not when the silence grew roots between us. I told myself it was strength that giving her space meant love. But maybe it was just easier than admitting I'd failed her. I dried my hands and sat again. The photograph seemed colder now, the color drained. I traced the outline of the chair in the image, that small, lonely thing in the middle of nowhere. There was something painfully human about it. The way it leaned, the way it waited. A thought came and stayed. What if this wasn't just a picture? What if it was a place one she wanted me to remember? Outside, the tide shifted. I could hear the slow pull of water against stone. The air had that sea-wet heaviness that never quite leaves your skin. I looked at the photograph one more time and noticed something I hadn't before in the corner of the image, barely visible, a faint reflection of light, like glass catching the sun. A window, perhaps, or a camera lens tilted just slightly wrong. The realization crept in quietly. She had taken this herself. That thought settled into me like a stone at the bottom of a pond. She had been there, wherever this place was. She had stood in that field, framed that chair, pressed the shutter, and sent it to me with 4 words meant to open something long sealed shut. I leaned back, closing my eyes, feeling the weight of it, all the years of silence, the distance that had stretched thin but never broken. The photograph wasn't a message. It was a mirror. I opened my eyes again. The sky outside had darkened. The photograph looked different in the dim light, the chair now almost black, the horizon softer, more forgiving. I thought of her hands, steady on a camera, of her eyes behind the lens, searching for something she couldn't say aloud. Maybe she wasn't asking me to look back at her. Maybe she was asking me to remember who we were before we stopped trying. The clock ticked in the next room, a quiet reminder that the day was ending. I placed the photograph back in the envelope and slid it into the drawer beside the sink. But the image stayed with me, printed somewhere behind my eyelids, the field, the chair, the shadow that looked almost like her. That night, I dreamed of the same place. The wind was louder there, and the sky heavier, but the chair was empty, waiting. I stood at the edge of the field, unable to move forward, unable to turn away. When I woke, the smell of smoke was still in the room. The photograph was back on the table. I don't remember taking it out. I hadn't planned to go. It was just a thought at first, a passing flicker that came and went like the tide. But the photograph wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I closed a drawer, it was there. Every time I walked past the table, I saw it. Face down or face up, it didn't matter. The field waited, quiet and patient, like a name I hadn't said in years. The sky that morning looked almost the same as the one in the picture, that dull, heavy gray that can't decide if it wants to rain. I told myself it was coincidence, but I knew better. Some things don't stay buried no matter how gently you cover them. The road out of town stretched thin and pale, the kind that hums under your tires like an old song. I drove with the window cracked just enough to let the wind in. The air smelled of salt and wet grass. The map on the passenger seat flapped with every gust, its edges soft from too much folding. I didn't have an address, just a memory of the photograph, and a feeling in my chest that pulled like a thread. The further I went, the quieter everything became. Houses gave way to hills, then to open land that breathed in slow rhythm with the clouds. Fences leaned with age, their wires humming faintly in the wind. The car's reflection followed me in puddles that hadn't dried from the night before. Every mile felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. I kept thinking about her, about Lila, and what she wanted me to see. The photo wasn't random. It was deliberate. The way she had framed the shot, the way the horizon cut just above the chair, it meant something. It had to. After an hour, I stopped for fuel at a station that looked forgotten. The kind with peeling paint and a bell that rang when you stepped inside. The clerk, an old man with hands stained by years of oil, didn't ask where I was headed. He just looked at me for a moment too long, like people do when they sense you're following something you shouldn't. The countryside rolled on, endless and soft, until the world around me began to feel strangely familiar. The shape of the hills, the bend of the road near the creek, a line of poplar trees standing tall against the wind. I slowed the car, my breath catching before my thoughts could. I had been here before. The memory surfaced slowly, like something rising through water. Lila was small, maybe 9, maybe 10, her hair tied back with a ribbon she kept adjusting every few minutes. We'd come out here one summer afternoon with a picnic basket and a blanket. I remember how she'd run through the grass, chasing dragonflies, her laughter soft and far away. I remember how the sun had fallen over her like a secret promise. That was the day she found the old chair. It had been there even then, half buried, crooked, but somehow perfect. She'd brushed the dust off the seat and said, "It looks lonely." I'd laughed, told her chairs can't be lonely, but she didn't smile back. She just stared at it, eyes wide and knowing, as if she could already see the years that would come after. Now, standing on that same patch of earth, I felt the air change. The field stretched out before me, endless and gray, moving gently under the breath of the wind. The grass bent all in one direction, just like in the photograph. The sound it made was low and hollow, like whispers beneath the soil. I stepped out of the car, my shoes sinking slightly into the wet ground. The silence here wasn't empty. It had weight, the kind that sits on your shoulders and makes you remember every word you wish you'd said. The chair was there, still leaning, still waiting. I walked closer, each step sinking into the memory. The wood was older now, rough and splintered. The once white paint faded to the color of bone. I touched the backrest gently. The texture was familiar, the grain, the uneven edge of the seat. I remembered the sound it made when she sat in it that day. A soft creak, a small sigh. The wind moved through the field, and for a moment, it sounded like her voice. I almost turned around, almost said her name. But there was no one there, just me, the chair, and the sound of time passing like breath. I closed my eyes and saw it, the picnic blanket, her drawing book, the small tin of colored pencils she used to carry everywhere. She had drawn the field that day. The sky, the grass, the chair, even me, sitting far away, lost in thought. I'd never seen the drawing again after that. Maybe she had kept it. Maybe that memory had stayed with her, growing quietly, until it found its way back to me through a photograph. I knelt beside the chair and brushed the dirt from its legs. Beneath the mud, faint initials were carved into the wood uneven. Small letters, L+M. I traced them with my finger, and something inside me cracked open. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that felt almost human. I sat on the ground, letting the grass bend around me. The horizon blurred in the distance, the gray sky folding into itself. I thought of all the moments between then and now, the years that had drifted away, the words that never crossed the silence between us. I had built my life in their absence, pretending they didn't matter. But here, in this field, with her memory all around me, I felt the truth settle like dust. She had sent me this place as a message, not of anger, but of return. A reminder of where we began before the distance, before the silence, before everything turned into smoke and paper. The chair creaked softly as the wind passed. I reached out and steadied it, whispering her name under my breath, afraid it might sound too loud. Lila. The sound disappeared into the air, carried off like a secret. I stayed there until the light began to fade, the sky deepening into dusk. When I finally stood, my hands were cold, streaked with earth and memory. The field looked the same as when I'd arrived, untouched by my being there. But I knew better. The land remembers, the air remembers. So do mothers. As I turned back toward the car, I looked once more at the chair. The wind had stopped. Everything was still. For a second, I thought I saw something, a figure at the far edge of the field, barely visible, standing in the same place as in the photograph. But when I blinked, it was gone. The hollow quiet returned, soft and endless. I stood there, unsure if what I'd seen was real, or if memory had simply found its shape again. The drive home was long and wordless. The photograph lay on the passenger seat beside me, its image now matching what I'd seen perfectly, hauntingly. The same chair, the same horizon, the same silence. And as the first stars appeared above the road, a thought formed in my chest, fragile and trembling. Why would she send me this place, this echo of what we once were, unless she wanted me to follow it back to her? The rain had passed by morning, but the ground still clung to the night. The air smelled like rust and wet roots, and the mist was slow to lift. I parked the car where the dirt road ended and walked the rest of the way, boots sinking into the soft earth, the hem of my coat brushing the tops of the grass. The field looked different now, not as wide, not as endless. Maybe it was the light, or maybe it was because I knew what waited for me in the center. The chair. It stood there as if the years had passed around it, not through it. Half buried, slanted, but still upright. The wood was gray now, stripped by weather, the seat worn into a shallow hollow that looked like it remembered every body that had ever rested there. I stopped a few feet away, afraid to touch it. From this distance, it could still be anything, an object, a relic, a symbol. But the moment I got closer, it would become what it really was, a memory I'd been avoiding. The wind moved softly through the grass, bending it in one direction. I could hear the faint hum of insects below the surface. Somewhere, water dripped slow, deliberate, like time rehearsing itself. I reached out, finally, and let my fingers rest on the top rail of the chair. The texture bit into my skin. A splinter lodged itself in my thumb, sharp and real. I didn't pull it out. The pain grounded me. I brushed more dirt away from the legs. The mud was thick, clinging, as if it didn't want to let go. Beneath the grime, faint carvings emerged, scratches that might once have been letters, though they were too worn to read now. I tried to imagine Lila's hands there, a pencil tucked behind her ear, her knees pulled up, the wind tugging at her hair. She used to draw everything: the clouds, the fence posts, me, especially me, when she thought I wasn't looking. The memory rose without asking. It had been summer then, the kind that makes time feel slower. We'd come to the field because her father had left that morning. He hadn't said goodbye properly, just a note on the counter, the sound of the door closing like a sentence ending too soon. I hadn't told her right away. Children notice things even when you think they don't, but they pretend not to, until you force them to. She'd found out by the time we reached this field. She hadn't cried. Not once. I remember how she'd wandered away from the blanket, sketchbook under her arm, the small tin of pencils clinking faintly as she walked. I'd called after her, but she didn't answer. When I found her, she was sitting in this chair, drawing the horizon. Her feet didn't touch the ground yet. She looked smaller than she was. I asked what she was drawing, and she said, "The part that doesn't move." I didn't understand then. I think I do now. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where she must have sat. The mud held the shape of old footprints, maybe mine, maybe hers, maybe neither. The chair made a small sound when the wind passed through it, a hollow creak, like the sigh of an old door that still waits to be opened. That day had been the start of everything. The silence didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, like fog, filling the small spaces first. Dinner tables, car rides, birthdays. The quiet became our language. Words only made it worse. I told myself she would understand one day, that she would see how hard I'd tried to hold it all together. But children remember the moments you think they've forgotten, the ones you survive. They inherit. The chair was heavy with that kind of memory. I could almost see her there, head bent, drawing lines that would never connect. The sun had been behind her that day, turning her hair gold. I had watched her from a distance, too afraid to break the moment, too tired to reach for her. That's what haunts me now, not the leaving, but the watching. The splinter still burned in my thumb. I pressed it deeper, letting the sting sharpen the edges of the memory. Maybe she'd sent the photograph because she remembered this place too. Maybe she wanted me to see what I'd missed. Or maybe it wasn't blame at all. Maybe it was a reminder not of the day her father left, but of the last time she and I had been in the same frame. Even if we didn't know it then, I looked up at the sky. The same gray I remembered. The same light that can't quite decide whether to forgive or forget. The field swayed around me, moving in slow waves, each blade bending in time with the wind. The sound of it filled the air, low and steady. It almost felt like breathing. I sat down on the edge of the chair. It creaked beneath my weight, but didn't collapse. The wood was cold, damp from the rain, and it smelled faintly of soil and old air. I ran my hand over the seat, feeling where the grain had splintered and softened. My hand stopped where hers might have rested, a small space, smooth in the middle, worn by time. I closed my eyes and listened. The field had its own kind of quiet, not empty, but full of everything I hadn't said. The echo of her laughter still lived somewhere in it, faint and far away, the way sound travels through water. When I opened my eyes again, the world felt different. The colors had dulled, as if time had exhaled. I took the photograph from my pocket, the same one she had sent me. I held it up, comparing the image to the world before me. Everything matched: the chair, the horizon, even the angle of the light. Only one thing was missing: the shadow in the distance. I scanned the far end of the field, where the grass grew taller and darker. Nothing moved. Still, the sense of presence clung to me. Maybe it was her I saw in that photograph, or maybe it was me standing exactly where I was now, looking back at what I'd lost. The wind rose again, stronger this time. The chair trembled beneath me, as if resisting the memory. I stood and stepped back, watching the field ripple. The horizon seemed to breathe. I whispered her name once, just to see if it still fit in my mouth. It did, but it came out thin, like a word that had forgotten how to echo. I knelt beside the chair and touched the initials carved faintly into the back leg. The mud had filled them in over the years, but I could still feel their shape. LM. My hand lingered there, trembling. "I remember," I said softly. The words didn't sound like mine. They sounded older, quieter. The wind carried them across the field and took them somewhere I couldn't follow. By the time I turned to leave, the sky had begun to clear. The first sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, landing on the chair, warming the wood until it looked almost alive. I stood there watching it for a while, that small, ordinary thing that had held so much of us. Maybe she had sent the photograph so I'd come back here. so I'd see what stayed after everything else left. So I'd remember that even silence has a place it begins from. The wind softened again, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard her voice not as she is now, but as she was then. Draw the part that doesn't move. The field held its breath. The chair waited, still and patient, as if it knew I finally understood. By the time I reached the highway, the sun had already sunk behind the hills. The world outside the windshield had turned into a slow-moving film of gray and amber, the kind of light that can't decide if it belongs to night or day. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I hadn't eaten since morning, but hunger didn't feel like something my body remembered how to do. The sign appeared without warning: Harper's Rest Motel. Letters half faded, the R hanging loose like it might fall off with the next storm. A single light flickered above the office door. I almost drove past, but fatigue made the decision for me. When I stepped out, the air smelled of rain on asphalt, and something faintly metallic. The building was small, 8 rooms lined in a single row, the kind of place where everything echoes longer than it should. The neon sign buzzed in the quiet, a nervous hum that made the darkness feel alive. Inside the office, a bell chimed as I opened the door. The man behind the counter looked up from a radio, his face washed in the pale green light of a desk lamp. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, with eyes that seemed too alert for the hour. He gave me a polite nod but didn't speak right away. I could hear the rain start again, soft against the glass. "Evening," I said, my voice thinner than I meant it to be. He studied me for a moment. "You driving far?" "Just passing through," I lied. He nodded, then glanced at the guest book on the counter. His finger traced down a line before stopping. He looked back at me, something curious settling behind his expression. "Mara," he said slowly, reading the name from the card I'd handed him. "That's your last name?" I hesitated. "Yes," he exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Your daughter was here last week." The air in the room shifted small, invisible, but sharp enough to feel. "I'm sorry?" He stood, walking to a row of hooks behind him. "Yeah," he said, rummaging through a set of keys. "Stayed 2 nights. Room 7. He found what he was looking for and turned the tag in his hand. "Left this behind." He placed the key on the counter, a small brass tag, worn smooth with years, the number 7 engraved faintly. I didn't move. My heart felt like it had missed a step. "She didn't say much," he added, almost apologetically. "Came in after dark, left early. Quiet girl," my mouth felt dry. "Did she say where she was going?" He shook his head. "No, but she seemed searching. You can tell when someone's not traveling, just wandering." He hesitated before adding, "She had your last name on the form." That's how I remembered. I took the key. It was cold, heavier than I expected. My fingers trembled slightly as I thanked him and turned toward the door. "Room 7's open," he called after me. "Didn't clean it yet. You can take a look if you want." I paused. The door swung lightly in my hand, the night air creeping in. I didn't want to, but of course, I did. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and cleaning solution, but beneath that, something warmer, familiar. Room 7 was at the far end, where the light barely reached. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air hit me first. Charcoal and perfume, faint but distinct. Her scent. The same one that used to linger in her room after she'd leave for school, that mix of smoke, lavender, and something I never could name. My knees went weak for a second, like memory had taken control of my body before my mind could resist it. The room was small. A single bed unmade, a half-drawn curtain letting in a sliver of moonlight, an old television, turned toward the wall as if someone had tried to stop it from watching. I could still see the shape of her, the dent in the pillow, the crease in the blanket where she might have sat. On the table by the window, an empty glass, still wet at the rim. A napkin folded into a square, the imprint of lipstick on its corner. She'd been here, not long ago. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped beneath me, carrying a faint warmth, or maybe that was my imagination refusing to let go. I traced the outline of the key in my palm, feeling its edges bite lightly against my skin. The room was too quiet. I could hear the rain outside, steady and unhurried, tapping against the gutter. I tried to picture her here, Lila, sitting by that same window, staring out at nothing, maybe holding the photograph before sending it to me. What had she been looking for? What had she hoped I'd see? On the nightstand, there was a small indentation in the dust rectangular, about the size of a photo frame. She'd left something there, or taken something with her. My mind began to build stories, each one heavier than the last. The guilt came slowly, like fog rolling in. I had spent years convincing myself that distance was safer than pain, that silence was love in disguise. But sitting there, in that room still carrying her scent, I realized how wrong I'd been. I opened the drawer of the nightstand, though I already knew what I'd find emptiness. But instead there was something inside. A matchbox, white with faded lettering, the kind you get from diners or cheap motels along the coast. I opened it. 3 matches left. The tips were darkened, used. The smell of smoke that had haunted my house for days returned all at once. I closed the matchbox and held it against my chest. My heart beat hard beneath it, unsteady and alive with questions I wasn't ready to ask. She'd been here a week before me. Maybe she'd sat where I was sitting now. Maybe she'd lit a match. Maybe she'd watched the flame until it burned out, just to see what it felt like to hold something that disappears in your hands. The rain grew heavier. It drummed softly on the roof, rhythmic and calm, like a heartbeat belonging to no one. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The light from the window trembled faintly with each passing car, washing the room in momentary gold. I thought of her handwriting again. You never looked back. Maybe this was what she meant. Not a warning, not punishment, just direction. When I finally stood, my reflection in the window startled me. For a second, it didn't look like me at all, it looked like her. The same tilt of the mouth, the same exhaustion in the eyes. I turned off the light before leaving. The air outside was cooler now, washed clean by the rain. As I locked the door, the metal key felt almost warm in my hand, as if it had borrowed some memory from her. The man at the counter was listening to the radio again when I returned the key. A slow song from another decade played softly between bursts of static. He looked up, expectant. She left this, I said, placing the matchbox on the counter. He nodded. Some people leave things behind for a reason. I didn't answer. I just looked at the matchbox once more before walking back into the night. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with what it had left behind, that faint scent of smoke and lavender, fading slowly, like her. The night pressed close around the motel, the kind of stillness that makes you hear things that aren't there. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air still felt damp, swollen with the memory of it. I hadn't planned to stay another night, yet I couldn't leave. Something about room 7 kept me there, as if the walls themselves held a breath I wasn't supposed to interrupt. I sat on the bed, turning the matchbox over in my hand. The white paper was soft at the edges, the kind that tears easily. I kept thinking of her fingers, how they might have struck those matches, one after another, watching the flame dance down until it almost touched her skin. The thought made my chest ache. I hadn't realized how quiet it had gotten until the clock on the wall ticked, each second sharp against the silence. I stood restless, pacing toward the small wooden nightstand beside the bed. I'd opened its drawer earlier, only halfway, finding nothing but dust and a single forgotten receipt. Now, for reasons I couldn't name, I pulled it open again. This time, something caught the light, the pale corner of an envelope, pressed against the back. I reached for it, the paper stiff from age, a faint layer of dust on top. When I brushed it off, I froze. It was my handwriting, my full name written in the top corner, the way I used to write it years ago, rounded, careful, before my hands learned to rush. I turned it over. The flap wasn't sealed. Inside were several folded pages, yellowing at the edges, ink smudged and faint. The first line stole the air from my lungs. Lila. I don't know how to begin. I sat down on the bed, the envelope trembling between my fingers. I recognized the moment I'd written it, the first week after she left home. The house had been too quiet. I'd tried to fill the silence with words, as if sentences could build a bridge she might someday walk back across. But I'd never mailed them. I unfolded the first letter. The paper crackled like dry leaves. My handwriting leaned too hard on certain words. Sorry, understand, someday. The ink had bled in small, uneven circles. I could almost see the tear stains where I'd tried to blot them out. I read aloud, my voice small in the room. I know I wasn't what you needed. I know I turned away when I should have stayed. But everything I did, even the distance, was meant to keep you safe from the parts of me that were breaking. The words hit like echoes returning after years of traveling. I closed my eyes and remembered the night. I'd written that letter. The kettle had boiled over on the stove. I'd forgotten to turn off the light in the hallway. My pen had run out halfway through a sentence, and I'd finished it in pencil, promising myself I'd send it when I found the courage. But courage had never come. The letters had disappeared somewhere between seasons, and I'd convinced myself I'd thrown them away. Yet here they were, in a motel drawer. I reached for the second letter. The paper was thinner, the writing more hurried, like someone trying to outrun a confession. I dreamed about the field again, it said. You were sitting in that chair, drawing something I couldn't see. I called your name, but the sound didn't reach you. Maybe it wasn't supposed to. My throat tightened. I remembered that dream I'd had it the same week she stopped answering my calls. It was the same chair I'd seen yesterday, half buried in mud, the same place she'd chosen to send me back to now. How had these letters ended up here? Had she found them? Had she been the one to bring them? The possibility twisted inside me, equal parts relief and shame. She'd held them, read them, knew what I'd been too afraid to say. And still, she hadn't called. I placed the pages carefully beside me, feeling the weight of them. They smelled faintly of smoke, not from the motel, not from any recent fire, the kind that seeps into paper over time, the kind that tells you something once burned nearby. I picked up the envelope again. At the very bottom, a small piece of folded paper, one I hadn't written. Different ink, different hand, 4 words, the same as before. You never looked back. But this time, beneath it, something new, faint, almost erased. Until now. I read it again, the words trembling in my vision. She had been here, not just in the room here, in this very moment of my absence, touching what I once held, answering what I never said. I stood, pacing toward the window. The curtains barely moved, but I could feel the night air pressing close, carrying that scent of salt and rain. The parking lot beyond was empty, except for my car and a single flickering light above the office door. I imagined her standing there a week ago, the same wind in her hair, the same restlessness in her steps. Did she open this drawer by accident, or did she know what she would find? Maybe she had come here looking for me, not in person, but in the past, in the places where I'd left versions of myself behind. I sat back down and held the letters again, pressing them to my chest. My heart beat through the paper, slow and uneven. The ink stains looked darker now, alive in the dim light. I tried to remember how it felt the day I stopped writing to her. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion, the quiet kind that settles in when you realize apologies no longer reach the person they're meant for. I'd packed the letters away in a box, tucked it behind coats and winter things. At some point it had vanished, and now I understood why. She had taken them. Or maybe I'd let her, without knowing. Maybe she'd come back one day when I wasn't home, found them and carried them away. And then, when words between us became impossible, she brought them here to this small, forgotten room as a reminder, not of blame, but of what remains unsent. I opened the first letter again, reading the final line I'd written all those years ago. If you ever find these, know that I never stopped looking for the right words. The air in the room seemed to move differently after that. The walls felt less heavy. I folded the pages carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. I didn't seal it this time. Some things shouldn't be closed again. When I turned off the lamp, the room dimmed to a soft gray. The sound of the rain returned faintly, tapping at the edges of the window pane. I lay down on the bed, the letters beside me, and listened to the hum of the world outside. It was the same kind of quiet I used to fill with excuses, but tonight it felt different. It felt like she was somewhere close, not here, not gone, just waiting. I whispered into the dark, almost to myself. I looked back, Lila. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was listening. The drive home felt longer than it should have. The sky hung low over the road, gray and swollen, as if it had something to say but couldn't form the words. The rain had stopped hours ago, yet every surface still glistened with its memory. My thoughts felt the same, damp, heavy, unwilling to dry. The envelope of letters sat on the passenger seat beside me. I didn't look at it. Some ghosts travel better unacknowledged. When I reached the house, the light from the porch barely reached the steps. The sea air was colder than usual, its salt clinging to the window panes. Inside, everything looked the same, but the quiet had changed. The kind of silence that feels aware of you. I left my coat on the hook, my shoes by the door. The photograph lay on the table where I'd left it before the trip, still resting inside its creased envelope. I almost walked past it, but something in me stopped. The air around it felt charged faint, electric, like the moment before lightning. I pulled it out and held it under the lamplight. At first, it seemed unchanged. The same gray field, the same crooked chair. But then my eyes caught something I hadn't seen before. Or maybe something that hadn't been there. In the distance, the shadow that had once been only a shape was now clearer. A figure, a girl, standing near the chair, her hair moving in the direction of the wind. My breath caught. The edges of the photograph quivered in my hand, just slightly enough for me to feel it, but not enough to prove it. I tightened my grip, pressing the glossy paper between my fingers. It felt warm. The girl's outline was faint but familiar. The slope of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, the way her stance seemed caught between leaving and staying. I knew that posture. I'd seen it before, years ago, on the edge of every argument we never finished. I set the photograph down on the table, then stepped back, half expecting it to move again. The lamplight flickered, its reflection sliding across the glossy surface. For a second, it looked like the girl turned her head. I blinked hard. Nothing changed. Just the wind outside, pressing against the windows, making the house breathe in slow, uneven intervals. I sat at the table, my hands folded together, staring. The room smelled faintly of salt, and something else, faint smoke, the same scent that had followed me since that first day. I could almost hear her voice in it, carried through memory instead of air. Had the photograph always looked like this? Had I missed it before? Or had something shifted in the light, in me, in time itself? The girl's shape was softer now, blurred at the edges as if the moment itself was still forming. The wind in the image seemed to move, bending the grass in waves. I knew it was impossible, but the longer I stared, the less impossible it felt. I leaned closer, tracing the outline of the field with my fingertip. The horizon glowed faintly, the way it does just before a storm breaks. I could almost smell rain again. The sound of the sea carried through the house, distant, rhythmic, like breathing through a closed door. The photograph trembled once more, this time more clearly. My pulse quickened. I turned it over, half expecting to see new words on the back, but it was still the same. You never looked back. But beneath those words, the paper felt raised, as though something had been pressed into it. I held it closer to the light and saw faint indentations, too shallow to read, like an unfinished sentence. I tilted the photo, trying to catch the shadow of the letters, but they vanished when the lamp flickered again. I sat back, heart tight, watching the photograph from across the room now, as if it were something alive. It had followed me through everything, the drive, the field, the motel, always silent, always waiting, but now it felt different, intentional, like it was trying to finish what the words couldn't. I thought of Lila again, of her hands holding a camera, of her eyes behind the lens. She always said photographs were just time pretending to be still. Maybe she was right. Maybe this one hadn't stopped moving yet. The house creaked. Somewhere upstairs, a door shifted in its frame. I almost called her name out loud. Old habits die slowly, especially the ones built on hope. I reached for the photograph again, holding it closer this time, until my reflection blurred into it. For a brief second, it was hard to tell where I ended, and the image began my face ghosting over that field, my hair catching the same light as the girl's. I whispered into the empty room, "What are you trying to tell me?" The wind outside answered first, rushing against the glass. The photograph trembled again, faint but deliberate, as if responding. It wasn't fear that rose in me this time. It was recognition. The same feeling I had in the field, when the chair creaked beneath my touch, when the air felt heavy with her presence. She wasn't gone. Not entirely. She had left her voice in the wind, her shape in the film, her silence in the ink. I looked again at the girl's figure. She was standing near the chair now, not behind it. The strands of her hair caught the light differently. The movement of the wind seemed softer, less chaotic, almost like she was waiting. I placed the photograph flat on the table and pressed my palm against it. The paper was warm again. I kept it there until the warmth faded, until the trembling stopped. When I lifted my hand, a faint outline of moisture from my skin had marked the glossy surface, a small human touch left on something that shouldn't have changed. I knew it would fade quickly, but for a moment, it looked like connection. I turned off the lamp and let the room fall into darkness. The faint moonlight from the window was enough to see the photograph still glowing slightly where the figure stood. I sat there for what felt like hours, the rhythm of the waves syncing with my heartbeat, the silence between us growing into something that no longer frightened me. Maybe the photograph hadn't changed. Maybe I was the one who had. Maybe it had always been waiting for me to finally see it, to look closer, to notice the space where she still existed, caught in the wind, between moments, between us. The clock struck midnight, its sound breaking the stillness like a slow, steady breath. I slipped the photograph back into its envelope, my fingers brushing the edges as though saying goodbye. As I placed it on the table, I caught a final glimpse under the moonlight, the girl in the distance, clearer now. Her hair lifted by wind I could almost feel, and for the first time since it arrived, I whispered softly into the quiet, not as a question but as an answer. "I see you." "Lila." The photograph didn't move again, but the air around it shifted gentle, almost tender, as if something in the room had finally exhaled. The first rumble came from far off low, slow, like the sea clearing its throat. The sky outside had turned the color of slate, swallowing the last of the daylight. I could feel it building before it arrived, The air inside the house had gone dense and heavy, like it was bracing for something. I had closed all the windows, but the wind still found its way in through the cracks, carrying salt and dampness with it. The waves were louder tonight, breaking against the shore with the rhythm of a slow, uneven heartbeat. Every sound seemed to belong to something bigger, something that wanted to remind me how small this house and I really were. The photograph still lay on the table where I'd left it, the one that never stopped changing. I'd been glancing at it all evening, unable to ignore its quiet pull. The girl in the distance clearer now, unmistakable, had anchored herself in my thoughts. Even when I looked away, I could feel her presence like a hand resting on my shoulder. When the wind howled again, the lights flickered. The lamps dimmed, revived, and then went out for good. The room folded into shadow. For a moment I just sat there, letting the darkness settle. The silence that followed was so deep it almost sounded alive. I lit a candle from the drawer, one of the thick ivory ones I kept for nights like this. The flame wavered before finding its shape, casting the room in soft gold. Everything looked different in that light, smaller, fragile. The photograph gleamed faintly on the table, its surface catching the flicker like it was breathing. I pulled the chair closer and sat. The wax dripped in slow trails down the candle's side, pooling near the base. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. The sea answered with another crash, louder, angrier. The photograph trembled once a whisper of movement that could have been the wind, then slid off the table, landing face down on the floor. I bent to pick it up, the candlelight stretching my shadow long across the wall. When I lifted it, I felt a strange thickness between my fingers, like two layers pressed together. I brought it closer to the light. There was something else beneath it. Another image. Faint but there, another photograph, glued to the back. My chest tightened. I hadn't noticed it before. I held the candle higher, the flame catching the glossy surface. The edge of the top photograph had begun to peel slightly at one corner, perhaps from the humidity or the heat of my hands. I ran my thumb gently along it, and it lifted just enough for me to see what lay beneath. A face. Not hers. Mine. My breath caught small and sharp. I peeled the rest back, careful not to tear it. And there it was, my own wedding photograph, faded with age, but unmistakable. The first one. The one Lila was too young to remember. I stared at it. The room suddenly smaller. The air too thin. The edges of the photograph were yellowed, the colors dulled by time. I was standing beside him, my first husband, his hand on my shoulder, both of us smiling in that way you do, when you still believe you know what the future holds. The sea was behind us, calm and endless. I hadn't seen this picture in years. I thought I'd thrown them all away after the divorce. After the silence that followed him leaving and her leaving, each departure folding into the other until I couldn't tell where one began. But here it was. Glued beneath the field, the chair, the shadow, a memory buried beneath another. I turned the candle slightly, watching the two images together, the present one half transparent now with the waxy light. The field and the wedding day seemed to blend into each other, like two ghosts sharing the same space. The girl in the distance stood where I once had, near the edge of the frame. Was this what she wanted me to see? The wind slammed against the windows, rattling the glass in their frames. The candle flickered violently, shadows bending across the walls like something alive. I set the photograph down, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I could hear the storm pulling at the house, the sea throwing itself against the rocks, the roof groaning under the weight of the wind. The power lines outside hissed and popped. I stared at the photograph again. My face, younger, softer, almost unrecognizable, looked back at me with a kind of calm I no longer trusted. That woman in the picture had no idea what was coming. She didn't know about the silence that would grow between her and her daughter, about the distance that would turn into years. The candle flame bent low, threatening to go out. For a heartbeat, the room went completely dark before the light revived. My heart followed its rhythm, flickering between fear and something else, understanding, maybe. The second photograph, the one beneath, was never meant to be seen, I realized. Or maybe it was. Maybe she had glued them together on purpose, forcing me to look at both, to remember that before the silence, there had been love. Before blame, there had been a beginning. I picked it up again and held it close. The two images together told a story, one of what was lost, one of what remained. The girl in the field, the woman at the shore. Both of them facing away, both caught in the same wind. The house creaked. The candle sputtered. A loud crack of thunder rolled across the coast, shaking the window glass. I felt it in my bones. I whispered her name into the room, though the storm drowned it out. Lila. The flame steadied again, and for a brief second, I thought I saw movement in the photograph, the girl's hair shifting, her outline clearer. the chair turning ever so slightly toward the sea. My reflection shimmered over hers, and for the first time, it didn't scare me. I set the picture back on the table, the candle beside it. The two lights, one from the flame, one from the reflection, trembled in sync. I understood then what she had done. She wasn't showing me what I'd lost. She was showing me what I'd refused to face, that even in endings, we leave traces of who we were. That memory isn't meant to be buried. It waits, quietly, until we're ready to look again. Outside, the storm began to move away, its voice softening with distance. The power didn't return, but the darkness no longer felt hostile. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the slow rhythm of the waves, to the quiet between them. The photograph lay still now, its two layers sealed again in silence. I didn't touch it. Some things are meant to stay half-seen. I closed my eyes, the scent of wax and salt filling the room, and whispered to the wind that still pressed softly against the window. I remember now, and somewhere between thunder and the tide, I thought I heard her answer faint, but there, like the sea repeating my words back to me. By dawn, the world had gone still again. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt too large for the small house it filled. The sea had calmed, but I could still hear its slow breathing through the cracks in the windows, a steady pull, like something old remembering its rhythm. The air carried the scent of wet salt and overturned earth. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the second photograph, the way my own younger face looked back at me through years of forgetting. There had been something almost cruel in that image, not because it hurt to remember, but because it made me realize how much of myself I had lost trying to keep the past sealed away. By 6, the sky had turned from black to pewter. A pale light slid over the edge of the horizon, quiet but insistent. I knew where I needed to go. The drive back to the field felt shorter this time. The road was slick with rain, the air heavy with the smell of pine and mud. The trees leaned toward the road as if trying to listen. Each mile pulled me deeper into something I'd been circling my whole life, a reckoning that had waited long enough. When I reached the place, the sky was a color between gray and silver. The field lay open and endless, the grass shining with moisture. The chair still stood at the center, half sunk in the earth, its wood darkened by rain. I parked the car by the edge of the road and stepped out. My boots sank instantly into the soft ground. Water pooled around my ankles, cold and clean. Every sound was amplified: the drip from the car's bumper, the soft sweep of wind brushing over the field, the distant call of a gull that had lost its way inland. As I walked toward the chair, I saw it, a small shape near its leg, wrapped in plastic, the color of dull glass. It glistened faintly under the weak morning light. I knelt down. My fingers hesitated for a second before reaching out. The plastic was wet and thin, secured tightly with a knot. Inside, I could see the corner of something pale paper, or maybe a photograph. The knot came loose easily. Inside was a small box, old but carefully sealed. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. A photograph lay on top. It was us. Lila couldn't have been more than 5. Her hair was short then, sun-warmed, sticking to her cheeks from the ocean breeze. She was holding a seashell in one hand, the hem of my dress in the other. We were both smiling, that real kind of smile, the one that belongs to people who don't yet know what it costs. I'd forgotten this picture existed. I must have taken it on one of those early summer days by the shore, before her father left, before I learned what silence could do to a home. Beneath the photograph was a small folded note. The paper had softened from the damp, the ink blurred in places. I unfolded it carefully, the edges trembling between my fingers. "You looked back once. Please do it again." The words were hers, the same handwriting that had haunted envelopes and photographs. Simple, direct, unforgivingly kind. I read it once. Then again, my throat tightened. The cold air bit at my face, but I didn't move. The field seemed to hold its breath with me. Every drop of water on the grass caught the light like tiny mirrors, reflecting pieces of a sky that hadn't decided whether to clear or weep. I sat down slowly on the chair, the wood damp beneath my coat. The photograph trembled in my lap, my reflection shivering faintly in its glossy surface. The note lay beside it, the ink darkening as moisture touched the paper. "You looked back once. When had I?" I thought of the years since she left, of all the times I had chosen not to reach out because pride was easier than pain. Maybe she wasn't talking about these years at all. Maybe she meant the day in this field, the day her father left, and she'd sat drawing the horizon. I had looked back at her then just once, long enough to see her small shoulders shaking, long enough to know she was crying, and still, I'd kept walking. That was the moment, wasn't it? The fracture neither of us had words for. The wind stirred again, soft but deliberate. The grass bent and swayed, and for a second, I thought I saw her there, not the child she was, not the woman she'd become, but something between the two, a shape made of light and memory, standing near the chair. I blinked, and the space was empty again. Only the wind remained, carrying a low hum that sounded almost like her laughter far away, weightless, impossibly familiar. Tears blurred the photograph in my hands. The image shimmered, dissolving into light and motion, until I couldn't tell whether it was the photo or the world itself that was trembling. "I'm looking, Lila," I whispered. The sound barely carried, but the field seemed to hear it anyway. The air shifted, warmer now, as if the storm's last breath had finally turned to calm. I folded the note gently and placed it back inside the box with the photograph. Then I buried it just beneath the chair, covering it with a thin layer of wet earth. My hands were shaking, muddy, raw from the cold, but I kept going until the box disappeared into the ground. The earth accepted it quietly, without resistance. When I stood, the clouds above had begun to break apart, strips of pale light threading through the sky. The horizon glowed faintly gold, the kind of fragile, hesitant light that only comes after a storm has spent itself. I took one last look at the chair. It stood there, as it always had, unmovable, patient, holding everything I had left behind. The grass around it shimmered with the beginning of morning. Then I turned toward the car. For the first time in years, I didn't look away from the road behind me. In the rearview mirror, the field stretched out like a memory finally at peace. And for the briefest moment, I thought I saw her standing there again, not as a ghost, not as regret, but as something lighter, something real. She raised her hand, and though the distance between us was still endless, I raised mine too. The sun broke through then, flooding the field in silver. The wind moved softly across the grass, carrying with it a single echo that reached me even through the closed car window, not words, just a feeling, a forgiveness shaped like breath. As I drove away, I didn't wipe the tears from my face. I wanted them to stay, to remind me that looking back didn't mean living in the past. It meant remembering the road that brought you here, and the person still waiting at its end. The days after the storm passed in a strange kind of quiet. The world seemed slower, as if time itself was learning to breathe again. The wind had softened, the sea had turned gentle, and even the air inside the house carried something lighter. I found myself listening to small things, the kettle clicking, the floorboards stretching, the curtains brushing against the glass. Sounds that used to blend into silence now felt like proof that life still existed here. Her photograph lay on the table where it always did, but I no longer avoided it. Every morning, I let the light fall across it, watched how the field shimmered differently depending on the hour. I'd stopped wondering how it changed. Some mysteries are gentler when left unsolved. A week passed before I finally decided. I couldn't say what made me do it. Maybe it was the note in the box, or maybe just the way the air smelled that morning, damp and clean. I took the camera down from the shelf. It had dust on the lens, the kind that only comes from neglect. I wiped it with the sleeve of my sweater and tested the shutter. It still worked, the faint click echoing in the room like the start of something small and deliberate. The drive back to the field felt different this time. No weight in the chest, no dread, just quiet. The road shimmered in places where puddles caught the early sunlight. The world looked washed, renewed. When I reached the field, the air was crisp, still carrying the faint sweetness of wet grass. The chair stood exactly as I had left it. The ground around it had begun to dry. The mud cracked into delicate patterns that looked almost like veins. I stood there for a long moment, letting the wind wrap around me, listening to the soft rustle of grass against my boots. The sound felt familiar, like an old lullaby remembered half right. I set up the camera on a rock a few paces away and framed the shot. The same composition she had once sent me, the same horizon, the same field, the same chair. But this time I stepped into the frame. For a while I didn't move. I just stood beside the chair, unsure of what expression to wear. The camera's light blinked, waiting for me to decide. I took a deep breath, turned toward the lens, and looked straight into it. Click. The sound was quiet, but final. I stayed there for a while longer after the shutter fell silent, just listening to the world around me. The field moved gently, bending under the wind. The horizon looked softer now, forgiving. I ran my hand over the chair's back, smooth in places where the wood had worn down, and whispered her name. Not to summon her, not to apologize, but just to say it again, as it was meant to be said. Lila. The air held it, then carried it away. When I got the photograph developed 2 days later, I didn't open the envelope right away. I let it sit on the counter through the evening, through the quiet that followed dinner, through the hum of the refrigerator and the song of the wind pressing against the door. Only when night came did I finally slide the picture out. There I was standing in the field beside the chair, my hair caught mid-movement by the wind, my face calm but raw. The sky behind me was pale and endless. The light had caught something in my eyes, a reflection of the horizon maybe, or something else I couldn't quite name. It didn't look posed. It looked real. I slipped the photograph into a new envelope. No return address, no message inside, just the image. Words had done enough damage between us. It was time to let silence speak differently. I sealed it, wrote her name, and walked to the postbox by the harbor. The sea was quiet that night, the surface rippling gently under the moon. I stood there for a moment before letting the envelope go. The metal slot made a soft sound as it closed, and just like that, it was done. The next few days moved in their own rhythm. The gulls came and went. The ocean shifted through shades of gray and blue. I spent mornings by the window, letting the wind in, letting the quiet settle where noise used to be. I didn't expect an answer. I just wanted her to see me, not the version she remembered, but the one who had finally turned back. On the 5th evening, it arrived. A small white envelope slid through the door, landing softly on the rug. My heart recognized it before my eyes did. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly as I turned it over. No stamp, no handwriting on the front. Just a faint crease where someone had folded it with care. Inside, a single piece of paper. 4 words written in her hand. I saw you. That was all. No greeting, no signature. But it was enough. More than enough. I read it once, twice, and then placed it beside the photograph on the table. The two sat there quietly, side by side, the past and the present finally sharing the same space without resistance. The sea wind rose through the open window, brushing the curtains so they lifted and fell in slow rhythm. The air smelled of salt and rain. Somewhere in the distance, waves folded into each other, soft and endless. I sat down, watching the curtains move, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, though not the easy kind. The kind that comes after a long storm, when the wreckage still lies scattered, but the air is clean again. I didn't smile right away. It came slowly, gently, like light easing its way through a broken window. It wasn't joy exactly, more like release. The small, fragile acknowledgement that forgiveness doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in, patient and quiet, until one morning you realize it's been sitting beside you all along. I looked at the 2 photographs again, hers and mine, and thought about the bridge between them. Not built of words or explanations, but of sight, of finally seeing each other after years of blindness. The house creaked softly as the wind shifted direction. I closed my eyes, listening to the sea. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always sound like apology. Sometimes it's just the faint rustle of curtains in a quiet room, the sea breathing outside your window, the weight of knowing you're no longer alone in the picture. I whispered her name one last time, not to fill the silence, but to share it. The waves answered in their own language, carrying the sound across the water until it was no longer mine. And in that quiet, I smiled again softly, like something once broken learning how to heal.